being spent on one war, and God knows how much more money is being spent that could be spent for us to have decent health care and education and housing and all the such things that we need. These people are not our enemies, and we need to really stop. We need to challenge this ongoing warmongering of this country. And then there's the kind of economic war that goes on in the rest of the world. For example, on the entire continent of Africa, where you find the real problem in the Sudan is oil, and you find that poor countries like Sierra Leone have all these diamonds, and the diamond market is overtaken. So all of these things affect how people live, and they are in many ways wars on the poor. Point number 9 of the Black Panther Party program was free. We want freedom for black and all oppressed people who were in prisons and jails in America. Well, most of the people in prison, and of course America now has the distinction of having the highest number of people in prison for any country in the world, and certainly the highest percentage incarceration, the highest incarceration rate in the world, including all these terrible countries that we like to denounce. We have the highest number of people incarcerated, and I would venture to say that 98% of them are poor people. Just that simple. Didn't get much of a fair trial, didn't have any money to pay, the underfunding of public defenders and so forth and so on, 3 strikes programs, mandatory sentencing, the private prison industry, which needs to be fed by having more bodies in it, and so forth and so on. And we have a lot of people who are in prison right now that are also political prisoners, such as Jamil Abdullah Alameen, who used to be known as H. Rat Brown, and my friend Chip Fitzgerald, whom I'm going to see in 2 days, whom I haven't seen since he was incarcerated in 1969 and has now been down for 40 years, and so forth and so on. The last point of the 10-point platform program was a call effectively for revolutionary change, because we talked about land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace, and so forth, but the bottom line was that it could only come using the reference point of the Declaration of Independence, that only way that this kind of change was going to take place was the same way that the one talked about in the Declaration of Independence. A revolution would have to take place, a fundamental shift and change in the government. So we quoted, "When a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce the people under absolute despotism. It is their right, it is their duty to throw off such a government." So we talked about revolutionary change in the United States. I want to finish out by saying there are many, many reasons. They named many reasons. Jefferson and the founders named many reasons why it was time to change the government and to have fundamental change. And we could name those as to black people. 250 years of slavery that has still not been compensated for, or even addressed or acknowledged as a crime that it was. The fact that the 40 acres of land that would have given blacks an edge in trying to start life over or have a life here. A century of more legalized Jim Crow, ongoing de facto discrimination in terms of mass incarcerations, overwhelming poverty, poor health, and so forth and so on. And the government using money, the people's money, to wage wars against people who have never done anything to any of us, and to bail out banks who have done a lot to most of us, and so forth and so on. So there are many reasons why revolutionary change is necessary, as far as I would be concerned, which goes back to the 10th point of the Black Panther Party program. We tried to address these programs, and this is the last thing I want to say, is that there were concrete things that we did to address some of these ills and to show that this was something we could address. For example, when we talked about health care, the Black Panther Party created free health clinics in almost every single city where we had chapters, and at the height we had over 40-some chapters in the United States, from the big cities and all the way through the Midwest, the South, the Northeast, the Southwest, and so forth and so on. We had free clinics where we provided people the opportunity to come, and we got volunteer doctors, and we put it all together. And we had free breakfast for children program to talk about the right of people to have food, and we had free food programs. We had busing to prison and free legal aid programs that we provided for people who didn't have lawyers and so forth and so on. And we operated these programs under we called them survival programs, and we operated them under the motto, survival pending revolution. And then we did many other things, of course. We established a model school to show that how education could be organized in the interest of the people. We patrolled the streets with guns against the police brutality. So we didn't just talk about no justice, no peace. We put patrols in the street with shotguns. You can believe me, that changed the dynamic of police behavior so fast it would actually shock you to realize how fast. When we talked about housing, we developed affordable housing in Oakland. We created something called the Oakland Community Housing Organization, which still exists today and has since put together almost 25 different developments of really low income and decent housing. We used the ballot when it was available to us to try to take over certain cities, particularly the city of Oakland, so that we could talk about, as I did later on, the revenues from the port being redistributed to the people. Because the port of Oakland was at that time the second largest port in the world in terms of volume business, and today it's the fourth. And there's still a lot of poor people ghettoized in the city of Oakland. We marched against the Vietnam War. We didn't just talk about the war, we marched against it. As a matter of fact, the Black Panther Party offered troops to the Viet Cong. I know you find that hard to believe, but believe me, it's true. And the Vietnamese, the South Vietnamese sent us a wonderful thank you letter and talked about how we were all comrades in arms, because we called for victory for the Vietnamese, not just peace, but victory for the Vietnamese. And we supported liberation struggles around the world, as we supported our friends and others in the United States who were waging similar battles. We said that how could we talk about the freedom of black people in the context of the oppression of the Native Americans, the Native people, and so we said we couldn't, and we formed a coalition and really helped to form the American Indian Movement, AIM. Same thing with the Chicanos in Southern California and throughout the country, particularly in California though, forming the Brown Berets, the coalition with them, with the Puerto Ricans, with the Young Lords, with the poor whites, with the Young Patriots out of Chicago. We talked about the liberation of women, and we talked about the liberation of gays. As a matter of fact, when we issued that statement in 1970 and linked our struggle with the struggle of for gay liberation, that was when we took the hardest hits from some of our so-called progressive friends. They went along with everything till it came to gays. And then we talked about what about the elderly, we helped to create the Gray Panthers, and what about the disabled? That's right. A lot of these little AARP programs came out of that moment too. These women weren't playing, these women were the Gray Panthers. And we formed a coalition with the Center for Independent Living to talk about the rights of the disabled, and I feel proud that I think we had a lot to do with some of these signs that are out here now with handicap or in wheelchair accessibility. And we talked about all other issues, and including the environment, and creating a program with the Trust for Public Land called Gardens in the Ghetto. Now, I say all that to say there were things that we did and the issues that we did, and that right now we're in this sort of period of doing nothing and wondering what we can do. And I think that it is valuable to look at the program of the party and to look at the action of the party and to consider what we might do today to change some of the dynamics and the things that we see are ongoing and relevant as to the Black Panther Party's program. At the end of his life, Martin Luther King asked the question, where do we go from here? His answer was the Poor People's Campaign and a demand for not only guaranteed income, but for a redistribution of the wealth of this nation. That was specifically articulated in the Poor People's Campaign. As we know, that campaign went hobbling along after the assassination of Dr. King just before they were about to launch the campaign. Interestingly enough, people think that he was killed in relationship to the Memphis garbage strike, but we fail to remember that he was organizing the Poor People's Campaign. And many blacks had moved away from Dr. King, including the NAACP and some of his own SCLC people, because when he denounced the war, that was one thing, but then he started talking about redistribution of the wealth. They said, well, this man's becoming a communist or some kind of a revolutionary or something, and of course he was a revolutionary. So I want to just close by saying, if we ask today the same question, where do we go from here? And look at and assess things, then we have to know that there are things that we need to do. We might want to use the Black Panther Party's 10-point platform and program, and the program that we set into place in terms of day-to-day survival but remembering that we would put into place